great to be here, see this big crowd. Looks like we have some interest in this topic, which is great. I know some of you guys more than others, but I'm Kevin, 82DD. I was first licensed back in 2018. I was just on YouTube and some videos popped up about a bit of a prepper bent uh, presentation for the hobby. Um, and I thought it was interesting. I got licensed. I went out, got my Baofeng, got on the repeaters, looked them up in repeater book, and I don't think it'll surprise you guys that I heard pretty much nothing. So I put the radio in a drawer, forgot about it. 2020, something happened that year you guys might remember. I was stuck in my house, just going stir crazy, and some videos popped up about amateur radio satellites. And I was saying to myself, if I got that radio and that antenna, I could be outside doing this right now. And that sounded like a fine idea. And I kind of took off from there. Some top level stuff here. One of the great things about satellites is they're pretty much fully available to licensed technicians. If you have a technician license, you can be doing just about everything that I'm talking about here. Even after I had got my extra, I was still mostly doing this using my tech privileges. Satellites are predictable. There's many ways to know when they're going to be here in our sky, where they're going to be, and that's great. I've been a busy person, but I know at 10 o'clock tonight I can go outside, spend 10 minutes, make some contacts, and I'm done. It allowed me to fit radio into my day. They're also quite reliable. As long as the repeaters are on these satellites, you can use them as opposed to HF. If there's a solar storm, the band can be closed. Could be QSB, but generally you can make these long-range contacts between 2 points. They're also really popular. You'll hear a lot of people on the satellites once you get on them. I can maybe count on one hand the number of times I've been the only person on a satellite. And they are a shared resource. A typical pass is about 10 minutes long, depending on the kind of satellite. And we'll talk about the implications of that being a shared resource a little later. For reference, the ISS orbit's about 420 kilometers up, moving by at 27,538 kilometers per hour, and that puts it over the horizon and gone in about 10 minutes. And there's a picture of a satellite there. That's typical amateur radio satellite. I believe that's AO91. These are small 10-centimeter cubes or multiples of these small cubes. They're often university projects that end up as ballasts on rocket launches, and the compartments that they fit them into are sort of standardized. So they're usually this size. You'll notice the size of the solar panels on these things. They're not very big. They don't build up a lot of charge. So they're not transmitting with a lot of power. So this is line of sight communication, much like our repeater that we work all the time. It's just the line of sight is thousands of kilometers away. This is the footprint for the International Space Station. I had hoped to capture this picture with Ithaca within the footprint, but you can see the small red dot there representing Ithaca. So that is the kind of range that you can get through the space station. The circle isn't a perfect representation. We're looking at a Mercator projection map in 2 dimensions. We live on a globe, so as these things get closer to the poles, that footprint will actually elongate by longitude. Depending on the satellite, you can actually sometimes go over the pole and talk to the other side. So, but the basic idea here is if you're on the edge of this footprint, the satellite's going to be very low in the sky for you. If you're in the middle, it's going to be directly over your head. And the orbits of satellites vary as well. So this is the ISS here on the right. And I think of the ISS as being a mostly west to east satellite. These orbits matter because it changes where that footprint is going to be placed and who you can talk to. Some satellites, this is AO91, the one that we are looking at on the left here. And this has more of a polar orbit. It actually goes up over the polar regions. This red line, basically the distance from the equator here is the orbital inclination, and that's different between satellites. If you remember those questions on the exam about the two-line elements file, this is one of them, one of the components. So if you live in Alaska, notice this red line. It doesn't really get up that far, so you're not going to have much luck. It will be very low in the sky for you, but AO91, for instance, has this more polar orbit, and we think of rocket launches going from west to east, but these satellites can really come at you from almost any direction, other than like northeast to southwest. Normally, on a pass like that, I would pick it up over Greenland somewhere and lose it over the Pacific. So if we go back to that time during the pandemic, a pass like this one on the left was, I was just outside listening for satellites at first, and I thought these passes were really interesting. So when it was in the top half up here, you could kind of hear the Pacific Northwest. The rest of the continent would come in down here. And then when the satellite was about to disappear down here, you start hearing Mexico, Latin America. Yeah. Um, Off to the east, you could hear a similar pass shape to that, but to the east side, you could hear Greenland, and then down to the south, Puerto Rico, Cuba. So uh, I was very mic shy back then, but I decided to start putting my call sign out and start calling some of these stations that I was hearing down to the south. And I didn't think much of it, but I started getting some emails. This is very small, sorry. But the one on the top is basically in Spanish from somebody in El Salvador. I was using this radio, 5 watts, Kenwood, and they're saying, I heard you crystal clear in YS district in El Salvador. Let's try to work. And then a couple Mexican stations. So these guys were happy. They wanted to talk to me, and that was pretty awesome. Um, these are just some of the guys that I've gotten to know on the air from down in that region. Elmer on the left, Aber in the middle. There's only one Hojo over there, but he is the advisor for the National Autonomous University of Mexico, their radio club, XE1 RCU. And then Juan on the right, you can see these guys kind of homebrew their own stuff, and it's really fun to make contacts with these guys. Some American operators make contacts with them in Spanish, but I kind of credit these guys with helping me to get over my mic fright. And that question on the exam, one of the purposes of amateur radio is to promote international goodwill. I got a good sense of it from these guys. So one of the reasons they were so happy to talk to me is that they're grid hunters. I'm a grid hunter now. Bob, you gave a presentation a while back about grid squares, and just for reference, these are what we use to communicate our position quickly on the air. It's 2 degrees longitude by 1 degree of latitude. Here in Ithaca, New York, we're in FN12. That's denoted by the red square there. Part of the satellite exchange involves call signs and grid squares, and that's basically it. You may have heard that we exchange grid squares. I don't believe that to be correct. We'll listen to some QSOs later. But if you're working satellites, you want to know which grid you're in. That's pretty important. And the population of the US is obviously not evenly distributed. Some of these grids are more populated than others. And if you're in one that's not very populated, people are going to want to talk to you. Similarly, you can go to ones that people need and have a lot of people trying to contact you. So this is a resource that we have in the satellite community. There's an award that AMSAT gives for having confirmed contacts with all 488 of these continental US grid squares. So we have our grid square map of which ones we've worked. We send it into a person who compiles it, generates this map, and then makes it available. This was back in the Twitter days. This is actually a little old at this point. But the darker green they are, the less needed they are. And if it skews towards orange or those colors, people need them. Uh, on this map here, FN12 is at 70% or so. When I first got on the air, it was in the 50s. So I had a lot of people calling me that wanted the grid. So that was pretty fun. Since I've been on the satellites, this is my progress. So all of those green grid squares, I have a confirmed contact with in Logbook of the World. The blue ones, I have their QSL card. The yellow ones, I have contacts with, but not a confirmation. If you work 100 grid squares, there's a VUCC award, VHF, UHF Century Club. So that's the first satellite award most people get. My grid count is at 592 today worldwide. Got 63 DXCC entities by satellite. And in 2023, I worked all 50 states with confirmed contacts. So, yeah. In terms of the satellites that are up there that you can work, really right now we have two types, FM and linear single sideband. I mentioned that the FM satellites are sort of like our repeaters, except that they're crossband. Usually you're going up in VHF and the signal is coming back down in UHF or vice versa. So sometimes they require tone, sometimes they don't. The added information is out there. The International Space Station crossband repeater is an FM satellite. And in terms of these being a shared resource, they are subject to the capture effect. That's this quirk of FM where only the strongest signal that is received is going to be demodulated and repeated. So if you want to get repeated by a satellite, your signal has to be the strongest one that it's receiving at that time. So basically one person at a time can be heard on the repeater essentially in the 10 minutes that it's going through the sky. So it's good to share, not step on other people or their QSOs. We use the term duplex operation. That is a word that seems to mean multiple things in this hobby, but we satellite operators use it to mean that we can hear ourselves on the downlink. You can get away with not doing that if you have a dual band radio. But this is Kenwood THD72. That was my first satellite radio. This is full duplex. It's got two VFOs in it. So yeah, but you don't need that. Yes.
What's the protocol for length of USO over the 10-minute window? Do most people try to get done within 1 or 2 minutes, or
Most definitely. And I've actually got some recordings that we can listen to, so we'll go through what I consider to be like a standard FM satellite exchange. It's usually much quicker than that. But if the satellite is not busy, people can chat a little more. But generally that kind of thing is not going on FM satellites. If you look up the information for an FM satellite, it will give you two frequencies. It's the frequency pair, and it's basically these two in green. So for instance, this is the ISS. It's 145.990 up and 437.8 down. You'll need more frequencies than that to work the satellite effectively. We'll talk about that more in detail in a bit. Linear satellites use single sideband. They're actually quite a bit of fun. But you need to have a UHF, VHF radio that can do single sideband. So right now that's ICOM 9700, 705. There's not a lot of them out there. Oh, the 991. Yep, for sure. And you may need two radios if your radio is not full duplex in order to work them. These satellites tend to be a slightly higher orbit, so the footprint is larger. Europe, very possible. I've worked Europe a bunch of times on these satellites. The neat thing about them is I kind of view them as little sub portions of the VHF and UHF bands flying over. You have a range of frequencies that you can work in. So, and that's at least 20 kilohertz. Single sideband signal is about 3 kilohertz. So that means at any time, about 5 or 6 people could be talking on one of these at the same time. Uh, it's a crossband. It's also a crossband like FM, but this is an inverting linear transponder. So that means down here we're on 145.875 down to 0.855. So here is the bottom of the VHF band, but that is going to go to the top of the UHF bands. So, and vice versa. So bottom of one band, your signal shows up the top of the other band, and vice versa. That relationship is maintained. Because more people can use these at one time, you'll hear a lot more rag chewing going on. Like HF, you can get pile-ups on these satellites. I was hoping to find some good examples of that, but I didn't have any in my recordings that I could find. And people also use different modes on these. CW, FT4 is very popular. Why FT4 rather than FT8? Because it takes half the time. That QSO is over in 30 seconds as opposed to a minute for FT8. But if you're going to use those other modes, you'll quickly run into task saturation, and you really need to have automatic Doppler control. You can't be messing around with your radio and trying to handle that at the same time. It's just not going to work. They do have a steeper learning curve, and they are more expensive to get into just because of the single sideband issue. And just there's fewer radios out there now that can work. Yaesu's coming out with a new one, the FTX1F, I believe, that will have these capabilities. So that's pretty exciting.
Upper or lower sideband?
It's actually both. So you can see right here, it is lower sideband going up, and the downlink is upper sideband.
Right.
So
So that's the inversion to it also.
yeah, yep. All right, so types of portable satellite ground stations. I I'm in amateur radio forums quite a bit, and I see this person everywhere saying you can work satellites with just the Baofeng. That person is not wrong. You can, but I think they are leaving an awful lot out when they say something like that. Uh, 5 watts is certainly enough to get it done. The issue is more in the antenna. So vertical omnidirectional antenna, the idea here is that it's basically like you cut a basketball in half and put it over this, and that's the radiation and sensitivity pattern of this antenna. But it doesn't quite work that way in reality. The signal strength here is going to be strongest broadside to the antenna. We have a bit of a null coming out of the top of this. So if you have a satellite that's flying over your head and you're sitting here pointing your null at it, you got to really think about what you're doing if you're going to be using one of these. Years back, I found an AMSAT article that talked about using NHT to work satellites, and I can't find it anymore, but basically the gist is that is not a skill for beginners, despite what you see online. It's more of an advanced skill. You need to understand how to set it for Doppler. And there's another, it went into how to actually work the satellites with one of these. And for those of you that might have the ISS downlink programmed into one of your radios, 437.8, this is an experiment. I encourage you to try at home. You can actually see the ISS, or if you're following it on an app through the sky, what you want to do is keep the back of the radio pointed at it as it moves through the sky. Why the back? 2 reasons. Number one, you're keeping the antenna broadside to keep the signal strength up, and you might want to actually try to have a QSO, so you need to be able to talk into the front. So as you're following it through the sky, you rotate the antenna in an arc like this, and you will find there's a point where the signal strength is strongest. Go 180 degrees from that point, same thing. Go 90 degrees off, you're going to totally lose the signal. Why does this occur? That's because your antenna is out of phase with the antenna that's on the satellite. It's a polarity mismatch. And you can actually lose about 20 dB of signal with that mismatch. When these satellites are pushed out into space, many of them are just tumbling. So these antennas are constantly moving, And it's a constant game of finding that match when you're working satellites. I would put a home station like we used to talk on our net in this same category. That's also a vertical omnidirectional antenna. In many cases, it's a mobile dual band radio. Can you make a satellite contact with those? Absolutely. Uh, Count 3 contacts that we've had now through the ISS. So you were probably right. Yeah. One time Jamie was down in the drive-through at Taco Bell, and I was in my yard up the hill at South Hill, and we were talking through the International Space Station. So it can be done. The thing, yep. The thing is, if you're going to do that, you are going to be subject to this polarity fading. There's really nothing you can do about it. The ISS doesn't tumble, so the fading occurs more slowly. You'll hear it for a longer period, but you'll also lose it for a longer period. So what can we do about that? We can use antennas like these guys. Think about that experiment that I just described where we're trying to find the polarity match. These antennas will indeed give you much more gain than a vertical omnidirectional antenna, but they also make that job of pointing at the satellite and finding the polarity alignment much easier. So that's why these things are designed the way they are. So in our example up here, we've got Peter over in Scotland. I've got him in my log a few times using a handheld and an arrow antenna. You can also use 2 handhelds. The arrow actually has 2 feed points. We'll talk about the arrow a little bit more, but you can connect one to the 2-meter feed point and the other to the 70-centimeter feed point, and then you've got a full duplex setup. So you can transmit on one, hear yourself on the other. A step up from that, and this is how I primarily operate, is a duplex mobile radio with a directional antenna. I think this is the way to go for most people that are getting into this now. The main reason being you can't get a duplex handheld anymore. That was discontinued with the THD-74. I've heard that Woshun, however you say that, has one out there, but you can get a full duplex mobile radio. You may already have one sitting around, and you can connect it to a directional antenna. Depending on the antenna you have, you may have to go to 2 feed points. So a duplexer may come in handy. This basically takes one feed line, splits it into 2, and there's some filtering in here to isolate the 70-centimeter and 2-meter sides, depending on your setup. Got a picture up here of Rob. He's out in Missouri. He's got a great YouTube satellite channel. Just go to YouTube and search his call sign. It'll come right up. So that's what he's using there. He's got it hung in a bag under his tripod. The arrow antenna comes pre-drilled under that handle. You put a little rubbing alcohol on there. It'll slide right off, and it's already drilled and tapped for a standard tripod mount. So that's pretty nice. This is my FM setup. It's a mobile radio. I've got a Kenwood TM V71. Down further in this bag is a 6 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. I use the hand mic. So when I'm operating, I've got my left hand pointing at the satellite. This is around my neck. And my right hand is either talking into the mic or reaching into my pocket for my phone where I have the satellite tracking so that I can figure out where I need to point. Moving further, we've got a linear setup. So this is the classic linear setup, at least from when I started. It's called the 1634 because that is 2 Yaesu FT817s. You probably can't see it very well, but it's sitting in a rail there. It's made by Portable Zero. They actually made one just for this specific purpose, so it will hold 2 of those. But you could actually mount a strap to that frame and just kind of wear that without the bag. Some people do that. One of the challenges when you're working linear satellites is finding your own signal. You have this downlink range of frequencies and you're going up on one frequency. So the bottom radio is typically the uplink radio. The top one is the downlink. So you're spinning the dial on the top one, just trying to find your own signal. Once you find that, if you're going to go down in frequency on the up radio by 3 kilohertz, you've got to go up in frequency on the other one because of that inverting relationship to stay on your own signal. And finally, I've just got a picture there on the bottom. That's Dell. He's a prolific POTA activator. You may have worked him if you're on the air, but he's also a big satellite guy, and he's living the dream right there. He's got a 9700 around his neck. That's mounted on a different portable zero frame. One of the fun things to keep an eye on is just how people try to use their 9700 portable, and that's one of the most elegant solutions I've seen to doing it. Some people use little step stools or whatnot, but it's still not perfect. What he's not showing is the battery, so there's some wire there running off screen. But he's taken satellite operation to the people on the National Mall. I've just loved that picture for a long time, so I've included it. You'll notice that what these people don't have is free hands. So if you're working a satellite pass, you really don't have the ability to write anything down. Who are you talking to? So on the bottom left, I really recommend if you're going to do this, that you get yourself a voice recorder. We're in a day and age now where these things are mostly coming with USB connections. So you want the 3.5 millimeter line-in microphone jack and just the line that will connect to the speaker output of your radio. When I operate, I have that recorder listening to my radio, and I plug my headphones into the recorder. I'm listening to the recording in real time. That gives me a chance to fix any audio problems before I realize after the pass, I've missed the whole pass because something wasn't set right. And then if either the radio battery dies or the battery dies in that recorder, I know about it. The implication here is you've got to listen to that after the fact and then transcribe all your contacts. You can make that easier on yourself by setting that recorder to universal time rather than local time. And then you know exactly when you've worked people. So these are probably the two most popular portable antennas that are out there right now, and they're both right here, the Arrow and the Elk. The Arrow is a dual band Yagi, and the Elk is a log periodic. You may notice one change. So I bought mine back in 2020. There's been a design change with these. On the 70 centimeter feed point, which is right here, you'll notice that the first director in front of it, there's this really small gap, whereas mine has universal spacing on the 70 centimeter elements. They just made that change and never really talked about why they did that, but there are some satellites that I definitely hear better with the Elk antenna, SO50 being a good example of that. And I'm just wondering if they did that to improve the 70 centimeter reception. If you're looking for one of these at a ham fest or something, maybe you look for that newer design. But this is still a good antenna for sure. It comes with a duplexer that's in that handle under the rubber grip. So that was great with a radio like this because we have one antenna connection here, and that goes to both feed points on the Arrow. Depending on how you're operating, you may not want to do that. You may just want to run coax from your radio right to those feed points or through a duplexer if you need to. But keep in mind that that duplexer is rated for only 10 watts. So if you have a mobile radio, you're going to probably blow it up on accident quite quickly. The Elk, no duplexer. It's got a single feed point. That's an SO239, and I just consider it to be a more portable antenna if you're going to throw it in the trunk of your car or something and go driving around. This is an example of a non-portable base station. I have many of these items. I'm working toward this, but I just don't operate this way. So the 9700, that's kind of the king of satellite radios right now. You have an SAT device that is gives you multiple functions. Number one, it does the Doppler correction automatically for you, but it will also control your antenna rotator. It also gives you pass predictions. It's got a logger on board. It's a really nice device that's come out. basically the stuff's gonna be inside your shack. Is this, and this, and everything else here is outside. So you have this box that controls your azimuth rotator and your elevation rotator. When you were just working with software to control your rotator, you still needed a separate interface device. A lot of people would build it as a kit that would actually take the software output, convert that into the commands for the rotator. The SAT is a really nice device and it handles all that automatically, so you don't have to think about it. You're generally going to have a long run of coax from the antenna going into your shack, so mass mounted preamps are usually required for the 70 centimeter side. And some sort of circularly polarized antennas outside, either circularly polarized or with a polarization switch so you can change between the two sets of elements. So you're gonna have something like this picture here, N8JCM. He's just rolls it out of his garage out into his yard when he wants to operate. But generally, you're gonna have something like that mounted on your house or on a mast outside somewhere. I don't really have that. It's a bit complicated. You need to run power out to the preamp, 12 volts, and also to the rotator. So it's a bit involved, and I just don't have that set up. I enjoy going outside, operating for 10 minutes, coming back inside, and I'm done. In terms of actually programming, so these are all FM descriptions here. You'll get that frequency pair, and this is a document that was really useful to me back in the day. This is called the KE0 PBR frequency cheat sheet. If you just Google that and go find it, it's available in an Excel download, PDF download. But what's nice about it is if you look up any satellite and get that frequency pair, you can come here and kind of deduce what you need to do for your programming. So one of the first things I would point out is notice that the 2-meter frequency, there's really nothing you need to do. Whether it's up or down, you can just leave your 2-meter frequency alone. You don't have to do anything with it. For 70 centimeters, you will have to do Doppler correction, or you'll only hear a very short portion of the pass, and that's the middle frequency. We all take a field trip over here to Route 13 and listen to cars come by. We'll hear the Doppler effect, but when the cars are closest to us, that's when they're moving the fastest. So you're actually going to spend, that's somewhat analogous to the center frequency. You're going to spend the least amount of time on that frequency listening to these satellites. It's mostly when they're coming towards you and then going away, and they go over very quickly. So this Doppler correction is pretty important. From that center frequency, you're going to go up 10 kilohertz and down 10 kilohertz in 5 kilohertz steps. Generally, you want these all right next to each other in your radio, so you can just click through them quickly. How do you know when to switch? You just use your ears. When one gets garbled, you just go to the next one. One quirk of this, it's probably way too small to see here in the room, but when 70 centimeters is on the downlink, the Doppler correction is down in frequency. So here on this satellite, we're going from 436,805 to 436,785. When 70 centimeters is on the uplink, the Doppler correction is in the other direction. We go up in frequency. It's still the same amount. That's a little confusing at first. The reason for that, consider the person here on the right. They are listening for a satellite that's approaching their ground station. It's come up over the horizon, it's approaching, and the satellite is not doing any Doppler correction at all. It's just listening on one frequency and it's sending out one frequency. But these communications, both directions, are going through this Doppler field that skews toward high frequency. There's probably a technical term for that Doppler field. So that means if we are listening for a signal coming from the satellite, we're going to hear it at a higher frequency. But if we're sending it, the satellite is also going to hear it at a higher frequency. So we have to send it lower to get it on frequency. Does this make sense? So I've helped quite a few people get on the satellites, and this is something that we just assume people know, but it's not obvious at first. Squelch will kill you if you're trying to work satellites. You want your squelch fully turned off, and you want to just be listening to the background noise on the frequency. Satellite operation is one of these things that we consider to be weak signal work, kind of like moon bounce. We're listening for milliwatts of transmitted power coming from thousands of kilometers away. So if you're taking your radio outside that you use to work the local repeater, you're going to have a bad time. It's not going to break the squelch. So turn that off. A real common thing for beginners when they're working satellites is they will only hear them when they are very close to overhead or at the closest point. There could be multiple reasons for that. This is one of them. That's the point where the satellite is actually strong enough to break the squelch. But also not correcting for Doppler or not enough antenna gain is some of the reasons that that happens. We talked about polarity mismatch. In terms of feed line, if you're going to be operating portable, you can go with RG58 or RG8X. But you want to keep the runs to 6 feet or less. The 70 centimeter attenuation won't be as bad. With a base station, we talked about that. You may need a preamp. We're talking about descents. Descents can be a problem on satellites as well, for sure. It's more common on satellites that are VHF, UHF down. We're often using the same antenna, sending signals and listening at the same time. So that transmitted signal overloads the front end of your receive radio and you can't hear yourself. You can kind of test if that's what's going on by turning down the power a bit. Or you can use a duplexer to filter it out or a high pass filter. The other thing that can really kill your signal is landscapes. So these are examples of places that are good to work satellites from. What do they have in common? Open sky. There's nothing between you and the satellite, places like this. Going back to the beginning where we're looking at that footprint picture, if you're going for a maximum range contact on a satellite, people at both edges of the footprint need to be facing each other in a place like this where they can both hear and receive the satellite when it's 1 or 2 degrees above the horizon. Should stand to reason that these are less ideal places to work satellites from. They're fine. I mean, you could get in when they're overhead. Forested landscapes, they definitely get better when the leaves drop. So I'm about to lose some signal when they come out in my yard, but that's okay. People work satellites from cities, but usually it's from rooftops, the tops of parking garages, but urban canyon's not going to work for you. Work with what you've got. This is a valuable document in terms of learning which satellites you can actually go outside and work. If you Google AMSAT, or what do I Google? AMSAT status page. Yep.
I think it's something you can get on your phone too, saves them.
Yeah, probably. I look at it on my phone most of the time. So this is a real-time map. If we're being good operators and we go outside and work a satellite, we come back inside and we report here what we heard. Was the satellite on? Was it working? What time did you do that? And also, where are you? So blue here indicates that everything was fine. Red means the satellite wasn't heard. Orange is conflicting reports. The legend is there. One useful thing about this, a little later, we'll listen to some astronaut contacts, but if that's your goal to talk to the International Space Station, this is a good page to go to because up here, this purple color, that is people reporting that the ISS crew was active on the radio. I have seen some confusion on here from European stations. I think it's just an English thing where they'll report it. But if you're seeing a bunch of US call signs reporting them active, that's a pretty good sign. There was one period where I noticed 2 Saturdays in a row that they were on for one particular pass. The following Saturday, I went out, worked that pass, and sure enough, they were on the radio there. So that's one way you could potentially catch them other than luck. But for the individual satellites, you can click on many of these and just get information about the satellite, what frequencies you need to work at, or anything else relevant to it. Satellites are always being launched. They're always falling out of the sky. April 1st, 2025 today, and these are the FM satellites that I know about that are up there that we can work. So obviously the ISS, that's the crossband repeater. Almost all of the time, that is just going to be hams talking to other hams, but every once in a while, the astronauts will get on that radio and you'll hear NA1SS and can make contacts with them. But the same skills that you're developing by talking to other hams are the same skills that you would need to use to talk to the astronauts. Also has a packet station on it that's occasionally on. So that works by simplex VHF and SSTV events on occasion. That's the frequency for that. When they have these events with schools, that is also the downlink frequency that you can listen to them. That works split 2 meters. Do not interfere with those. Those are a pre-scheduled thing, and you don't want to mess with those. AO91 we talked about. SO50 is a cool satellite that's been up there for a long time. It can be a little hard to hear, and it operates on a 10-minute timer. You'll hear it turn off. All you have to do is transmit on the same frequency, but without a tone, and that rearms the timer for another 10 minutes. And generally, that happens every pass. Somebody's got to turn it back on, and you're good till it's gone. I wouldn't worry about the next two too much. They've been less active lately, but we do have a new satellite up there, SO124, which was just commissioned a couple months ago. Linear satellites, RS-44 is probably my favorite satellite to work. We'll listen to a contact on that in a bit. This is actually classified as a rocket body because the satellite never separated from the booster stage. It's just floating around up there like that. Satellite is working, but this satellite is characterized by massive fading. That's not polarity fading. That is just the rocket body being in the way of your antenna. That's a very popular satellite with rovers. It's got a big footprint. That's the one that I mostly talk to Europe on. JO97, nothing special there. Japanese satellite. AO7, that's a cool satellite. It was launched in 1974. It was dead for a long time. And then a couple years ago, it just suddenly came back online. Some corrosion or something made a new path for a circuit and it started working again. That operates in 2 modes. We use it mostly in mode B. Mode A actually has a 10-meter downlink. I do not have a portable antenna for that and don't do that, but it's occasionally in mode A. And there's a new one there as well. It was a satellite launched by the University of Maine that you can work. In terms of knowing when they're going over, you can use websites. Here's a list of them. N2YO is a good one. People use that to know when the ISS is going over so they can see it. So it has this tab there for visible passes, but when you want to use it for amateur radio, we don't really care if we can see it or not. So you want to make sure you go with all passes. I use apps. Those are some that I like. Software, if you have Doppler tracking software, it will usually tell you when the satellites are going over. And we talked about the SAT controller. In terms of general advice for all of these, they will usually take care of it, but you want to make sure the 2-line element file is regularly updated at least every 2 weeks. If society ever failed, we would quickly lose these as communication tools because we would have no idea when they're going to be above our horizon or what the passes would look like. We'd have no idea just because these slowly drift out over time. So every couple weeks is a good time to keep them updated. This is a cool app that I like called Theodolite. It's basically got some crosshairs. Wherever you're pointing here, it will give you your azimuth direction. It will also give you your elevation. I don't use this as much, but that's the tilt axis. And it will also tell you where in the world you are very precisely and what your elevation is. So if you're roving, that's a useful tool. This picture is from a rove that I did up in FN14. That's Guffin Bay in Lake Ontario. See my carefully selected landscape there, and my linear satellite bag sitting on the table there about to work a pass. If you want to find rovers, people that are going to rare grids, these are some tools for doing that, the AMSAT roving page. But generally, this is going to refer to this other one, which I highly recommend, HAMSAT, hams.at. So we can post our own roves here. We can say we're going to be in this particular grid on this particular satellite at this particular time. This knows that I'm in grid FN12, so it will tell me if I have overlap with those people, how long I will be able to work them, and it gives you a countdown to the pass, so you know when it's going to occur. There's also useful information here. This is a recent screen capture. So Jerry Whiskey 8 Lima radio is going to be in Echo Mike 85, and he's saying on RS-44, I'm going to use a stationary transmit frequency, and there it is. So that's useful information. We'll talk about that in a bit when we listen to these QSLs. So David, to your question, this is what a satellite contact looks like, in my opinion. Basically, these three things in red: the announcement, you call them, and then they QSL it. So what we're going to hear here, this is a contact that I had with K6SFO. He's out in the Bay Area in California. This is an FM satellite. That's a pretty good contact. That's going coast to coast, making good use of the footprint there. You'll hear him say, K6SFO, I'm in Charlie Mike 88. We don't really call CQ on these satellites, but it's like a repeater. That's not a rule. Not a big deal if you want to get on and call it. So I hear him and I say K6 SFO, this is 82DD, FN12, give him my grid, and then he comes back with my call sign and QSLs it with his grid. QSL is a powerful word on satellites. It means the same thing, but we're generally recording our passes. If we say that, it means we got a clear recording, we copied you, we've got it. This satellite is very low in the sky for both of us, and we are working to get this contact done, but this is what it sounds like. Hopefully you can hear the elements of the contact.
You're up, Foxtrot Oscar. Charlie Mike, PD. Go 6 Sierra Foxtrot Oscar from Delta Delta 2 Delta Delta Fox November 1 2. Go 6 Delta Delta 2 Delta Delta Foxtrot November 1 2 New York. Can you give me phonetics, please? Charlie Mike, PD.
That's pretty much it. Usually if you both parties can hear the satellite very well, it goes a lot faster. But that was a difficult one. Oops. Oh boy. All right, so this is a linear satellite. This is a contact I had with Jonathan N4AKV. He's one of our more prolific rovers right now. He was on this epic rove last summer up in the Maritimes, and he went to St. Pierre and Miquelon. So I have that in my log thanks to him. But along the way, he put all these grids on the air. So this is a linear contact. With this, you have to correct Doppler near constantly. With FM satellites, we have a 15 kilohertz or 12 bandwidth, and we're sitting on one frequency. The Doppler is drifting. Here we have 3 kilohertz of bandwidth. It goes off frequency a lot faster. So I'm making a series of frequent small corrections. I showed you the rover posting, for instance. He would be on 145.955. I keep this here as a reference when I'm working these satellites. So if I know I'm going to hear him for the first 30% or so of the pass. All right, so I was saying I know where to look for this guy. So the first thing I have to do, I go to my 705 there and I have to find this rover. So I'm sitting on his signal and I have to drift with him. With my uplink radio, I then have to move my signal to where he is. So what I'll typically be doing, what's happening here, he's cranking through the contacts here. Lots of people are calling him. I will be off frequency and I can see where my signal is. I'll usually 82 dD, something like that. Works pretty well on single sideband. And I'm just getting closer and closer to where he is. And when I get a good chance, I'm going to make that one final correction that puts my signal into this passband that we're trying to work. So this is what a linear satellite sounds.
Delta info Eastern 202, Go Bus 202, USO, Fox November 12, thanks for another one, Jonathan.
All right, so it's a little different. It's a lot more work when I'm doing this. My head is really buried in this bag, focused on the radio. It's a good time to sneak up on me. I'm not really paying attention to much else, but that's quite a bit of fun. And these are astronaut contacts. So the one on the left, this is my first contact. You might argue whether this meets the QSO structure, but I would say there's no grid square for the International Space Station. So this was my first.
Alpha Delta 2, Delta Delta, Fox November 12. Alpha Delta 2, Delta Delta, November Alpha 1, Sierra. Welcome aboard the International Space Station.
It was pretty cool. You can hear like the other astronauts in the background. I don't know if they're having mealtime or something or just working on something. It's another one. This is the one that I figured out that they were going to be on this pass.
Delta 2, Delta Delta, NA1SS, welcome aboard. Best wishes, safe travels from Ithaca, New York. Oh, thanks so much.
I don't know what to say to an astronaut. You know, hope the food's good up there. You know, but
Come back soon.
it's doable. You can do it. You know, I know. Yeah, the first one I was totally doing a fist pump. You know, so yeah. But every once in a while they get on the radio and they just talk to random hams. If some kid is talking, obviously let the kids ask their questions and sneak in. So ERIS is the organization that manages the amateur radio stations up there. They are the interface between we radio amateurs and the space agencies, and they have a page that gives you advice for contacting the ISS. Just a reminder that you can contact the ISS pretty regularly, but you're usually going to be talking to other hams. One thing I would point out, a lot of online advice out there says 5 watts is plenty for working satellites, and it very often is, but I don't think that's good advice for working the ISS. As soon as this thing gets over the North American continent, everybody and their brother is sending a signal at it. We have the FM capture effect. You have to put the strongest signal in. The official advice here is highlighted in red. They're saying a typical ground station for contacting the ISS is a 2-meter FM transceiver and 25 to 100 watts of output power. So keep that in mind if people are telling you that 5 watts is enough and you're going to go out there and try to work it on a Saturday afternoon. QRO. They also have a page that has the specific frequencies, and they also keep track of what's going on the space station. So if they have some module that's going to be docking or they're going to be doing an EVA, they will post about it here that the amateur radios will be turned off. So that's nice before you get all your stuff and go outside and try to work at. But these pages will also give you the information that you need to work these stations. Logging satellite contacts is a little different if you do make them. The quirks of doing this are that you have to have the propagation mode set to satellite and you have to have the satellite denoted. This is TQSL. If you guys use Logbook of the World, this is just the program that comes along with it, and that's what I use as I'm listening to my recordings. I'm just punching them in one at a time here, but AC log and actual portable app, Ham2K Polo, are pretty good for satellite contacts. If you need to fix your logs, ADEF Master, very useful program for amending satellite logs. General advice, you should really learn to hear these satellites from horizon to horizon before you ever attempt calling them. You'll hear it on every pass, somebody just putting their call sign and grid out over and over again. They don't realize they're getting in because they can't hear themselves. Other people are trying to call them and they just don't even know. And I would encourage you to not be that person if you can. You hear what's going on. Operate full duplex if you can. It's a little easier to make contacts and helps you to be a considerate operator anyways. Your hands are going to be busy. You know, each hand has a job. You got to figure out what they're going to do. We talked about the FM capture effect and yeah, we're getting short here on time. So one last thing, I'm just going to talk about roving. One of the cool things about this aspect of the hobby is a lot of these grids have stories with them. And people go to them and they post the trip along the way. So we're talking about DL88 here, which is this grid right here. A lot of people need it. If you're looking at that and thinking that doesn't look like it's in the US, it's barely in the US. So this is a Mexican grid, but we can see the Big Bend of Texas here. It's part of Big Bend National Park, but there's this tiny slice right here that makes it a US grid. And it's a very rare one. It's not a popular part of the park. In fact, it's a dangerous place to reach. Every couple of years, some rover will get a bee in their bonnet that they're going to go there. This is a cool story. These guys were actually on their way out to activate that grid, and a monsoon storm came through, and they ended up stuck up to their axle and couldn't get out. Absolutely no cell service out there. It takes hours to get to this grid. But what they did have is a GPS device and satellite communication equipment. So they use the satellites to rescue themselves. And you can actually listen to that if you want to hear an example of emergency traffic. It's on the Ham Radio 2.0 YouTube channel. Search for Rescued by Satellite, and you can actually hear that. So a couple summers ago, this guy, Jeff, KI0KB, went out there. He's just posted some pictures of the trip. It's not a drive for the faint of heart. If you made it once, consider yourself lucky. You don't do it again. It's hours of driving on roads like this to get out there, out into the Chihuahuan Desert. But he ultimately made it a place to go when you want to be alone with just your ham friends. And there's the Theodolite app and picture for Bob, the Forerunner made it. So and that is my presentation. Thanks for your attention. Thanks to Rovers. And when you're doing this, you're out in your yard with weird equipment. I have like such weird interactions with my neighbors. You know, I'm out there like, hey, you know, but sometimes I'm out there at like 3 a.m. trying to get some rare DX with my dog and shining lights, and they've been cool about it. So that's my presentation. What's that?
Do they have any stationary satellites?
Yeah, QO100 is a stationary satellite, but here in the US, we can't hit it. It's behind the curvature of the Earth, but Europe, Africa, and into Asia, they can all work it. There's been some talk of some geostationary satellites, but here we don't have access to them.
They use any digital communication, Fred?
Yeah, like FT4. FT4 is done on satellites. There was one that was killed by a solar flare last year. It used packet mode. That was a lot of fun. That was actually my last picture there. That's what I was doing. But yeah, they do.
The letters on the satellite name mean anything?
Yeah, AO means American Oscar Orbiting Satellite Carrying Amateur Radio, and the 91 is just the designator when it earned its commission. SO50 is a Saudi satellite. PO 100 is a Philippine satellite, so it's like call signs, and then the country has some numeration system.
Speaking for the group, thank you very much.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.